grew up in a ministry home. When I was born, my parents were full-time children's ministry evangelists, and then when I was 8, they took a job in South Florida as children's pastors. And I grew up doing the best ministry in the world, which is ministry to kids. And I grew up doing that, and it's awesome because after I kind of grew up and went to college, I actually started traveling with my brother Mike. We went all over the country speaking at camps and churches. Went to college to study ministry. Then after college, I jumped to seminary. Met my wife Liz there at college, and we fell in love, and we had these dreams for our life. We had this picture of what our life would look like. And our plan was we were going to leave Lakeland. We were going to go start as a youth pastor or a college and young adult pastor at a big church. And in the middle of all of that, got married, and then my wife was diagnosed with stage 2 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So for 6 months, all of our plans came to a screeching halt. For 6 months, my wife courageously battled cancer through chemo. And it was just amazing what happened. It's like all of our plans were on hold, and yet God was doing something significant in our hearts.
During that 6 months, we fell in love with our city. And in December of 2005, I successfully completed treatment for cancer. It wasn't long after that we first started to feel in our hearts, maybe we're supposed to do something in Lakeland. Until finally one day, I looked at Jason and I said, I think we should just start a church. And I think he probably thought I was crazy at first. And I even drew out on a napkin where I thought a good space in Lakeland that our church could be. And that was kind of the first little dreams and inklings and formations of what would become Access Church.
So from that hand-drawn napkin map that Liz made, we decided that we needed to do something. So we started meeting in my living room. But very quickly we realized that we needed to take this and expand it. We needed to go public. And so on Monday, March 19th, we were on Monday nights, we had our first real service ever. And we rented out a room at the Lakeland Center. Now the Lakeland Center was both amazing and terrible for so many reasons. It was amazing because we would always have a place to meet, but it was terrible because that complex is so unbelievably big. And so we started there and we never knew where we were going to be. In fact, we kind of came up with this motto along the way, which is, if you can find us, you'll love us, because we never knew where we would be. And we had our first service Monday night, March 19th, and I was just praying anybody would show up. And we were thrilled to have somewhere between 50 and 60 people show up. And I thought, this is great. We're gonna launch and have this massive turnout, and people will keep coming. And the next week, it was like half. And I had this faith, this trust that God would provide. And I'll never forget counting the first offering. It took about 3 seconds because the whole offering was $5.
I didn't tell Jason, I think, till later that I had given like $4, but that was our first offering, our first thing ever. Is a bunch of college students, and we were there to try to kind of all figure it out together week by week.
Man, when we started out, everything we had was really patchwork. We had a borrowed sound system, this really like rusty old screen, and everything was just really, it didn't really fit together. But what we kind of realized was this, that even though we didn't have the best of everything, people kept showing up, and it wasn't because of our music or our lights or anything like that. It was just because of this community that we were building, and it was something people wanted to be a part of.
And God did some amazing things at the Lakeland Center. In fact, I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful for it because it gave us the place where we started. It gave us the place where we began to take form and for our ministry to take shape. And really, it was the place that God used to kind of be the launching pad for the next season of our church. What we realized was the college Bible study that we had started in our living room, for all of these people who were now coming, Access had become their church. And so we said, if it's a church, let's treat it like a church. And so we moved to Sunday nights, and quickly we needed a place that would be our own. And so the YMCA in South Lakeland was crazy gracious to us, and they let us use their back building. They have a kids building in the back that was perfect for what we needed. And the best part immediately was we had some stability. People would know where they could actually find us. And so people started coming, and it was kind of in this season that it felt like our church began to take focus, began to take shape. And all of a sudden we went from just being a handful of college students to young families coming. Now the gym was kind of funny. The gym was interesting because it had all the primary colors everywhere, and we tried to hide it as much as we could. So I got on Craigslist and I found a deal on the biggest screen I've ever seen. It was this massive screen. It took a team of us, the first time we set it up, it took a team of us almost 2 hours to set it up. We called it Big Bertha, and we had this love-hate relationship with Big Bertha. We loved how big it was, we loved how it looked, but it was a pain.
It was an absolute nightmare.
It was the most horrible thing that has ever graced this planet.
And a lot of amazing things happened there in that building. We had our first ever outreach projects that were really successful. We did a community back to school event that attracted hundreds of people. Like, a lot of great things happened when we were there in that back building of the Y. I even remember this was the season that we were able to make our first hire.
So Jason called me and said, hey, I need you to come join the team. And I was living in Virginia with my family at the time, and there just wasn't any money. And I needed a job that kind of paid. And I said, what can you give me? And he answered nothing. I said, then I can't come. And he called me again a couple weeks later. Hey, I need you to come. You need to be a part of this. You need to come down and join the team. And finally, after growth and things were really happening, he called me and said, I got a salary for you. I can give you $300 a month. And so my family packed up everything we had and moved to Florida to join the team.
And so Jay moved down. He was our first staff member. And together we were able to start doing more. And as we were doing more, the church began to grow.
And I remember specifically one Sunday night, some friends and we were greeting and bringing in more chairs and all kinds of things like that. But we weren't really paying attention to what the back gym looked like. And when we walked in, it was literally wall-to-wall people. There was no more aisles, there was no more room on the sides, and we just couldn't believe how many people came at that time.
Pretty quickly we realized that this space that we had wasn't working because we had outgrown it.
So we transitioned at the Y because all of a sudden we've got some momentum, we're growing. People are hearing about Access and they're inviting friends, and we moved to the front part of the Y.
We got there on the first Sunday that we were gonna meet in the front building of the YMCA. We were moving to Sunday mornings. This was gonna be a huge shift as we were becoming a church. And the very first Sunday we get there, we realized that they double booked us with the Polk County Senior Adult Swim Games. Now, think about this for a moment. I am preaching in a dark gymnasium, but I could see off in the back corner where the doorway was, there was an 80-something-year-old man standing, just staring at me, nodding along as I was preaching, wearing just a black Speedo. It was special times. A miracle happened for us there in the front building of the YMCA. All of a sudden, this dream that we had of a new kind of church community began to really just, the focus began to sharpen. And all of a sudden, like, hundreds of people started coming. And this little college Bible study that started in my living room was now attracting hundreds of people. I remember we did a series early on called Let's Fake Love. And it was a series on intimacy in marriage and what God's design for it was. And over the course of like 4 weeks, every week there was like 100 more people coming than the week before.
And so we capped off that series by having our first worship artist in. We had Jared Anderson lead worship with us that week. And I remember after worship joining with some of the other staff and some of the team members at Access who had started to pull in extra racks of chairs. And we started pulling in chairs from the lobby. We started pulling in chairs from people's offices to set up for all the people that were there. And I just remember during the service sitting up against the back brick wall of the YMCA, and all of us were just kind of looking at each other like, what just happened?
These transitions all started happening and it was all moving really fast. And then we said, we got to do something. So we went to 2 services. And when we went to 2 services, then all of a sudden we filled the auditorium up twice over. And it was cool to see this happening, but we had this problem. We were busting at the seams at the YMCA. And we knew we had to move. We knew we needed a bigger spot. And I'll never forget getting a call from my pastor friend in the city named David. And he said, hey, my church was meeting at George Jenkins High School. Is there any chance you'd be interested? And I said, let me pray about it. Yes, of course we would be interested. We needed a place to go. I'll never forget our first Sunday there at Jenkins. It's like instantly all the stuff we'd been working on, now we had a place to kind of call our own, and the services were awesome. Worship was amazing. In fact, there at Jenkins, we had our very first night of worship.
And it was an amazing night. We were blown away by how our church came together and worshiped together.
Another thing that happened in this transition at George Jenkins was we just got more involved in doing things to serve the community. We began to do outreaches like Feeding Children Everywhere, where we've packaged tens of thousands of meals together in a day. Last year, for the first time, we did something called Serve Day. And in Serve Day, about 300 of us rolled up our sleeves and we got out in the communities in Lakeland and Brandon to just serve people. And all of those happened because of what happened that started at George Jenkins High School. Well, in around 2011, my wife and I took a trip to Europe, and I'll never forget this weird, almost sense of depression sat on me while we were there. And I'm in some of the most beautiful cities in the world, but I couldn't shake this sense that God was transitioning us and something was going to change. I didn't know what that looked like, but I remember coming home and talking to Liz and saying, I think God wants us to start another church. And in this time, I also went and talked to my pastors, the overseers of our church. And I said, I feel like we should do something new. And they said, don't leave and start something new. Just start something new that's an extension of the beautiful church community you've already started. In that season, there was this book that kind of became the rhythm or the metaphor for what we were processing as a church. The book was called The Circle Makers, and we did a series called Circles. And in that series, I challenged our church with the phrase that Mark Batterson wrote that forever challenged me, which was that God honors bold prayers because bold prayers honor God. And as we were praying, we really felt like God said to circle Tampa. We had this sense in our heart that we should take everything we did at Access in Lakeland and just multiply it, do another one. And that's how the Brandon campus came to be.
In January 2013, we launched this new campus, and we've seen hundreds of lives changed, dozens of salvations and baptisms, lives being changed, marriages being restored, and God certainly doing what He promised in our hearts that He was going to do.
As I think back about the last 10 years, I am completely blown away by God's faithfulness to us. We've seen so many people make the decision to follow Jesus and to go public with their faith through baptism. I love stories of whole families getting baptized together on the same day. I mean, that's absolutely unbelievable to me. I believe our best days are ahead of us. I believe that we're going to see hundreds of students get connected in relationship and also get connected to their Creator through Access Youth. But we've seen hundreds of kids come to faith in Jesus through Access Kids, which is really one of my favorite things we do. In fact, we had our first VBS this last year and 200 kids came and many of them encountered Jesus for the first time. I mean, God's done some amazing things in and through our church. We've sent teams of people all over the world, and that's just gonna keep happening. I'll never forget our first missions trip a few years ago to Chiapas in South Mexico. We built a church, and the highlight for me of the trip was standing on the stage at the dedication service where they handed the keys to a man in that church congregation who had prayed for years that God would give them a church, and we got to be the answer to the prayer that he was praying. Here's what I know. Jesus said he would build his church. You and I get to be the fulfillment of that promise. And because of your love, because of your generosity, and because of the way you ferociously serve people, with all of my heart, I believe, Access, that the best is yet to come. Ago, we invited our church to do something that I thought was just going to be fun. We invited our church, as we were approaching this 10-year anniversary, we invited you to use #ThankYouAccess or to send us an email sharing your story, sharing the story of God's faithfulness, of what God has done in your life through this local church. And you started sharing your stories, and here's what I thought. Here was our idea. Our idea was you were going to put up little posts, and we would use them before and after the service on the screen with little thoughts. And I thought you would do like, I love them donuts, #ThankYouAccess. That's what I thought. But instead what we got was dozens of letters from people like you. Some people wrote letters that were like 5, 6, 7 pages long of the things that God has done for you. of healings that have happened in your body, of marriages that were falling apart and hanging on that God restored, of people having the courage to adopt because of what happened in and through our church, of people who were getting through addictions, getting over alcohol abuse, getting past drug use for years. I recount the stories of people who even said they were suicidal until a moment here where God spoke to them. And I think as I'm thinking through this story and over these last couple of weeks, I was talking to a friend and he said, like, tell me how are things going? And I had, a few weeks ago, I had like 2 or 3 of the roughest weeks of all 10 years of pastoring. And the last like 7 or 8 days, as we've had these nostalgic memories, we've looked at the videos, and as I've read your stories, I've just felt like God has hugged me and said, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm like so thankful to him for just allowing us to be a part of this amazing, amazing story. As I read the stories from you, I kind of began to realize that you and I at times have had what I call altar moments. We've had these times when it felt like we hit pause and we just stopped and we reflected on God's goodness to us. And I've certainly had many of these moments in my life. Now, one thing my wife has pointed out to me about me recently is I have this interesting habit. Whenever something is either weird or unusual, or when I just don't understand something at times, I just go, huh. And I do this all the time. Like a few weeks ago, my wife and I were at this Disney eating event, which is something we like to do. And we were there, and we were with this group of people that they paired us with. And there was this lady who just kept drinking. I don't know what her deal was, but at one point she got a little loose, and she just asked me something that was so inappropriate. She asked me if I had had a very specific surgery to stop having kids. And I don't know why, in front of all these people, she just asked. And I said, huh? Because it's all you can say in the moment. Every once in a while, my wife will get super emotional, once in a great while, and she'll get super emotional. And when she comes to me, I'll just say, huh. And I have had so many moments like that at the history of our church that I would call these moments that are altars. Now, let me kind of define altars, and I want to look at the Bible, and I want to tell you some more of our story. Altars, in my opinion, are symbols. They're symbols that give meaning, but they're symbols from the past that give meaning to the present, and they give us faith for the future. Altars are symbols from the past. They give meaning to the present, and they give us faith for the future. In the book of Joshua chapter 4, let me set up what's happening. Joshua chapter 1, God speaks to Joshua, and he says, Moses, your fearless leader. Moses, the hero, one of the epic leaders in the whole Bible. Moses, your leader is dead. But take courage because I'm with you. And often we read the Bible at kind of a cursory glance and we're like, man, they had so much courage, I didn't have courage. Over and over and over again, 4 times in Joshua chapter 1, God says to Joshua, take courage, take courage, take courage. Why does he do that? Because Joshua was afraid in this moment. And God speaks to Joshua and he says, Moses is dead, he's gone, and I'm going to use you to do what Moses could never do. Going to use you to take the people of Israel from where they are into this land, the promised land that I have given to them. And so in Joshua chapter 1, God makes him this promise. By Joshua chapter 6, God says to them, look, I know there's this one massive city, Jericho, in your way. I'm going to deliver it to your hands. In fact, when God speaks, he speaks in past tense. He says, Joshua, see Jericho? I've delivered it to you already. So one of the things you learn as you read about Joshua's life, the principle is the same for him as it is for us, which is we don't fight from the position of battle. We fight from the position of promise, that God has promised us everything. And so Joshua goes towards this land, and in Joshua chapter 4, between God telling him that Moses has died and before God delivers Jericho, which is the last obstacle to them taking the land, in Joshua chapter 4, a miracle happens. Now in Joshua chapter 4, here's what happens. Joshua leads the people towards the promised land, but to get to the promised land, they would have to cross a river, the Jordan River. So God does a miracle, and he parts the Jordan River, and in Joshua chapter 4, if you have your Bibles, you can open with me there. If not, it'll be on the screen. It says this. It says, when the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from the people, 1 from each tribe, and tell them to take 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priest stood, and to carry them over with you and to put them down at the place where you stay tonight. It says, find 12 stones, large stones, and bring them. There's a reason. Verse 19 says this. On the 10th day of the first month, the people went up from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. And Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones that he had taken out of the Jordan, and he said to the Israelites, in the future, listen to this, in the future, when your descendants ask their fathers, what do these stones mean? Tell them that Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan just what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. Verse 24, he did so, this is important. He did so that all the people of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. Joshua leads the people courageously, but God says, I want to do for you what I did for the previous generation. I want you to experience it. And the people of Israel could have just walked around the Jordan River, but why do you think God wanted them to walk through the middle of the Jordan instead of just walking around it? I think it wasn't just so that God could show off. I think it's so that God could remind us that the same powerful God from generations ago is powerful today. And what God does for them is he lets them walk across right through the middle of the Jordan River on dry ground, the same way he had for the previous generation who had walked across the Red Sea. Now we know this, there wasn't a single person living that had walked across the Red Sea. What God was saying to him is, I want to show you my faithfulness in this generation the same way I've showed you my faithfulness in the past generation. So he gets the people and he says, choose 12 stones, and before we go to battle, before we take on Jericho, we're going to build this altar together. And remember, an altar is a symbol from the past that gives meaning to the present, which gives us faith for the future. And in verse 23, he says, the reason we're doing this, the reason we're building this altar is because I want to be able to look back, and someday when you're old and your kids are grown and you have grandkids, you can come back to this place and you can recount God's faithfulness to us. You can remember that it was the Lord who brought us here. Now, all throughout the history of our church, I have these moments that are those altar moments. They're those, kind of moments. I remember the second night we had access, would have been March 26, 2007. We had our service and it was like 25 or 30 people, and I was heartbroken, to be honest. We had over 50 or 60 people the week before, and less than half came back the second week, and the setup and tear down crew was me. And so after the service, I was tearing everything down and loading it into the trailer, and I used my key fob for my car, and I hit the remote button on my car, and it looked like it had rained outside because it looked like there were drops of water all over the driver's side window. And when I went around the side of the car, I got to the edge of the car and I realized that someone had broken into my car during the service and went through all of my stuff. My brother Mike was so mad for so long because he had changed before service, and he had a little bottle that had like 1/8 of the bottle left of cologne in it, and they took the cologne. I just found out like 3 weeks ago that it was a knockoff from Canal Street in New York, but he's been mad all these years. Someone help him, Jesus. And so, but they went through, and I remember, if you've ever had your house broken into or a car broken into, you know that awkward sense of like vulnerability you feel, that sense of like someone invaded my personal space. I had this moment where I was already sad because of what had happened during the service, and I walked off to the side because I didn't want anyone to see me cry, and so I walked off to the side by myself. And as I was like reflecting, like, God, why did this happen? Why did this happen? The Lord said something to me. He said this. He said, you'll only face opposition if you're doing something worth opposing, so stand up and get back to it. And I said, okay, we'll keep at it, I guess. And then the years went on, and we had some great moments. We had some difficult seasons. I remember there was this one night. It was the summer, our first summer. Now, if you're starting a college Bible study, take notes from me as to how not to do it. We started the college Bible study during the spring break time of the year, which meant we had 1 month before summer hits. And college students leave for the summer, so that's a really terrible time to start a college Bible study. And so I remember our first summer, it got really, really hard. In fact, there were nights when Liz and I would like burn up the phone lines just trying to beg people to come. And there was one night in particular where I had this kind of a difficult moment. I turned around during worship, and I was standing on the front row, and I was singing, and I turned around and looked, and there was like 8 total people there. And I had this moment like, God, why did you bring me here for this? Why did you bring me to this moment? And I just had this moment where I said, it doesn't matter who's here. I'm just going to lead in worship. So I lifted my hands and I began to sing. And I had this moment, and the only way I can describe it without sounding super spiritual and super weird is to say it in a way that sounds super spiritual and super weird, which was I had this moment where it felt like all of a sudden these pictures just started hitting me right in the face. And I was worshiping and singing, and I saw this picture in my heart. It's hard to explain, but I saw this picture in my heart of me standing on the front row worshiping. And instead of there being 8, there were hundreds. And then fast forward several years later, there was this moment when we had our very first night of worship that we just talked about in the video. And I was standing on the front row worshiping, and it's like God tapped me on the shoulder and said, remember that? Here is the fulfillment of that promise. And today, as we were singing, there was a line in the song that said, "Our God is faithful and every single word he says is true." And Liz reached over and grabbed my hand, and I could have told you with unbelievable clarity that Liz was gonna reach over and grab my hand when that line happened, and I heard hundreds of you singing behind us, because I saw this moment when there was 8 people sitting behind me at the Lakeland Center. And as I think about the future of our church, I get unbelievably excited and so unbelievably scared, just like Joshua. And the reason I get scared is because I've had other pictures in my heart of this on steroids, of this with thousands and thousands of people from all over Central Florida, from Lakeland and Brandon and through the whole I-4 corridor, coming together and worshiping in huge arenas. I have these pictures in my heart, and every single one that I've seen so far, it's like I've known. It's not deja vu. It's these weird moments where I saw them 10 years ago singing on the front row, and I'm seeing God fulfill his promises. Here's another one of those moments for me. I've had these moments when it's come to money. And one of the commitments I've always made as your pastor is that I'll never, ever, ever be manipulative. I'll never do anything weird when it comes to money. But in the early days, Access was the college Bible study. We had like no money coming in. And I remember that we were renting the Lakeland Center, which was around $500 a week at that time. And we desperately needed the income to come in to keep it going, because Liz and I had emptied all of our savings out at this point. And I remember we were getting towards the end of a month. And I remember specifically I needed $1,186 to come in that offering to keep it going. And I was just tapped out. I had no more money at this point. And so I said, God, you're going to have to do it. And we received the offering, and it was a few bucks. And I went home that night thinking, this is it. Well, thank God for what he did, and we'll shut this baby down. And the next day, I go to the mail, and in the mail was a letter from my mom and dad. And I opened the letter, and it's this letter from my dad saying, Jason, God spoke to me and told me to give this to you, and he went on to encourage me with his letter. I still have the letter in my office. And in it was a check for $1,200, $14 more than what we needed. And I never told him that we needed it, I promise. I never, ever, ever will manipulate or twist someone's arm to give. And since that moment, God showed me that he'll always take care of us. Some months after that, we had a kind of an interesting situation with a guy in our church who was a very large contributor. He gave over 10% of our whole budget. And he accused me of some things at this meal that were categorically untrue. And he stormed out and left, and he left with his giving. And I had this moment with God, one of those, kind of moments, where I said, I can either chase him or we can continue to do what's right. We just made the decision to put our head down and say, God, you've always provided. I remember the moment with the check in my mailbox. I remember your faithfulness. You're going to continue to be faithful. And I can't tell you what happened, but over the next 4 months, our giving more than doubled in the church, because we just made the decision that we're just going to honor God in every part of our church, which especially includes our money. One last one for you. I had another one of those kind of moments, that kind of altar moment early on. You heard in the video the story of how the Brandon campus started. And Brandon campus, I love you, and I am so glad you're here today. I really am. I hope you know that you're not an extension of our church. You're our church. Like, we are one church that meets in 2 locations, and this thing is going to keep going, and we're going to see hundreds and hundreds of people continue to come to know Jesus as a result of our church together. But early on, we just had the sense from God that we should do this, and you heard some of that in the video. Here's some of the story that you don't really know. Early on, after we started the Brandon campus, all of a sudden, the weirdest thing happened. We got off to this great start, and everything was going wonderful, but for like 4 months, our giving cut in half. Legitimately a 40% drop in giving happened overnight. And we had just invested everything to get the Brandon campus even started. And so just a couple months into the Brandon campus, we were like, what do we do? Do we shut down the Brandon campus? Do we cut staff? Do we cut our offices? And we cut everything we possibly could. And we had these moments where we didn't know what we should do. In fact, Pastor Ryan is here, who is just my homeboy. I love him, because we had meetings at Chick-fil-A, I remember, where we started saying things like, do we have to shut this down? If you get a job offer, maybe you should take it. It was just these really difficult days. And then we moved to Sunday nights just to keep it alive, because the church was gracious and let us use their building on Sunday nights. And there was this one particular night that I remember vividly. It is etched into my heart, where it was the perfect storm. Everyone who could be gone was gone on that evening. And I remember that Andy Brown, who was here, was preaching that night. And I was the sound guy, because our sound guy was out. Everybody was out. And I was running sound, and I counted the number of people, and there were 13 people in the room. And the whole service as he was preaching, I have no idea what he said because the whole time my heart was beating 1,000 miles a moment and I was choking back tears. And I went home that night so depressed, literally saying things to Liz like, we've got to come up with an exit strategy. We've got to shut this thing down. And I had resolved to go to the office on Tuesday and have a staff meeting and tell the staff, hey, we love you guys, but we're gonna have to make this hard transition and shut down the Brandon campus. And the next night, Monday night at 6 p.m., you can't make this up, I get a call from a pastor in Brandon. Now, 2 months prior to this, I sent an email to like probably a dozen pastors saying, here's our situation. We got off to a great start, had a financial crisis. We're going to die if we don't find a place to move to. Sent it 2 months before, didn't hear from a single person. Get a call from a pastor 2 months later, the day after the worst night in the history of our Brandon campus. It's from a pastor, and he says to me, he goes, Jason, I was in Israel when I got your email. And usually when I get an email that's got a request, I just glance at it, but I delete it. But he said, the Lord spoke to me and said, you need to pay attention to this. And 2 months later, to the day that we needed him, he called and said, we have a church campus that's been meeting at the YMCA. It's really not doing good. We would love to give you the YMCA if you would like it. And I said, huh? And a miracle happened. God provides this place, and in the last couple years that we've been at the Y, we've seen a miracle happen. We've seen so many people make the decision to follow Jesus, so many people get baptized, so many stories of life change that have happened because of a moment, an altar, a place where we stop and we say, God, you're unbelievable at what you do. See, altars are these places that we pause. They're these places where we say, God, we remember your faithfulness to us. We worship you and we celebrate what you've done. And then altars are also places where we come and we sacrifice. They're places we come and we say, God, you've been faithful to us in the past. Therefore, your faithfulness leads to my faith. Your faithfulness leads me to trust you for the future. So these last couple of weeks, as we've been telling the stories with our staff and as we've been watching this documentary and working on it together, as these things have been happening, I've just been reminded of God's unbelievable, undeniable faithfulness to us. God's been faithful. And as we build this altar today, as we celebrate the 10 years of God's goodness, as you recount the miracles that God has maybe done in your life, here's my challenge to you. Will you join me in saying, God, we worship you. We celebrate everything you've done, and then together we sacrifice to continue to do what you've always done through us. Here's how we're going to end today. If you are new, tune me out for the next 2 minutes because this doesn't apply to you. But about a month ago, I told our church that we were going to do something that we've never done before in the history of our church. We were going to ask our church to give sacrificially together. We were calling it Taking Ground. And here's what Taking Ground is. Taking Ground was all about us making this decision together as a church to celebrate God's faithfulness, to worship him for what he's done, and then to begin to invest now in what God is going to continue to do for the future. And here's what I'm asking our church to do. If this is not your church, you have no obligation to participate. I told you before, and I'll tell you again, I do not manipulate when it comes to money. I told you a month ago about it because I wanted you to pray, and I wanted you to have the courage to be obedient. So what we're asking our church to do is this, is today to kick off an intentional campaign for 10 months to raise money. Now, Mayor Wiggs is here, and he and I have talked about this before. We have looked for years in Lakeland for a facility. We've been looking in Brandon for a facility, and in both places, there's been virtually no options whatsoever. But I know with all of my heart that there's going to be a day when the right door opens, and we as a church need to be ready to seize our divine moments. And the way we get ready for it is to prepare. And so as a church, we've been tucking back every additional dollar that we can for the last couple of years. But I believe that at this altar, at this service, at this 10-year anniversary, we have the opportunity to come to the table and to thank God for his faithfulness, to worship and celebrate him, but also to sacrifice. And as we sacrifice, I believe it's going to prepare us for what God is going to do. So let me talk you through this, and then we're going to pray, we're going to give, and we're going to celebrate together. Here's what I'm asking you to do. In your worship guide, you should have gotten one of these. If you didn't get one, we can get one for you. If you didn't come prepared to give today, it's no big deal because you got 10 months. And I've asked you to pray, and I've asked you to ask God what he would have you to do. My wife and I have prayed, and we have set a commitment bigger than anything we've ever set before. I'll be as bold as to tell you that our commitment is more than we gave all of last year combined, and it's over and above our tithes and offerings because we believe in this. We believe in this church. We believe in you. We celebrate your stories. And I'm going to ask you to ask God what he would have you to do, and then to be faithful and to give. Now here's how we're going to end today. In just a moment, I'm going to pray. And if you came prepared to give today, you can give your regular tithes and offerings. This is intended to be over and above what you normally give over the next 10 months. You don't have to give it all today. Some of you have told me over the last couple of weeks, I want to give, I just don't have anything extra right now. No big deal. Trust God's faithfulness and make a pledge and a promise to God, and then do whatever it takes, and let's be faithful together, and let's see what God will do through his people as they're faithful over these next 10 months. Our goal is $250,000. As we set this goal, I really felt like God told me there's a person here that could do all of it themselves. If you're here, holler at your God and just obey him. You know what I'm saying? In a moment, we're going to give you an opportunity to give, and I believe for some of you, this will be one of those altar moments, one of those, kind of moments. Because you make the pledge, as you make that pledge, you're going to see God's faithfulness to provide in ways that you can't even begin to wrap your minds around. So here's how we're going to end in just a moment. I'm going to pray. And in fact, I'm going to ask you to prepare yourselves to give. As you're doing that, let me just tell you one last thing. There's a couple ways you can give to this campaign over the next 10 months. Today, you can give in the service. You can use the same offering envelope, and at the bottom it says building, our future building fund. Just designate what portion of it goes to where. That's easy. The second way you can give is online on our website at www.access.tv/give. There's an easy way to do it there. Or if you're a text to giver, if you use your phone to give, all you have to do is write the word future and the amount. So future and then $250,000. Just do that all at once and hit send. The number that you need to use is 84321. Now here is how I'm going to end. Usually I would pray, and I'd pray for courage, and I'd pray for you to have wisdom, but today I'm just going to thank God, and then we're going to respond. I'm going to thank God for his faithfulness, and we're going to respond. Altars are places, they're symbols that God has done something in the past that gives meaning to now, that prepares us to sacrifice for the future. And so as we give together today, would you join me in celebrating God's faithfulness? And I'm going to ask you to prepare yourselves to give. I'm going to ask the ushers to come forward now. Got people up in the balcony. Hi, that's cool. I'm going to ask the ushers to come forward now, and we're going to do this together. We're going to give sacrificially together to make this dream of God's church a reality. Last thought, Jesus said in John 16:18, Jesus himself said, I will build my church. 5 words, I will build my church. And the gates of hell, like nothing, will be able to stand against it. And the way God does it is through the sacrificial faithfulness of his people. Let me pray for you, then we're going to worship together again. Jesus, we come together today on this day of celebration. We build an altar in our hearts. We say you've been faithful to us in the past. That gives meaning to today, and it gives us faith and hope for the future. And God, I know that I've seen pictures in my heart of the things that you want to do in the future. I thank you that you are a good God and you're a faithful God. And if you were one or the other, it would be dangerous, but you're both. You're good and faithful. So God, I thank you so much that you answer every prayer, that you hear our hearts, and you have something unbelievable in store for all of us. Jesus, as we give today and as we give over these next 10 months, I ask you to do what only you can do, which is to be our provider, to be our source. We thank you, God, for the way that you've taken care of us as a church. God, we thank you for the last 10 years. We built an altar today to remember and celebrate. And we thank you that this altar represents the fact that you're not done with us yet. The best is yet to come. And we thank you for that, God, in Jesus' name.